Welcome to Canusa Street, a podcast at the intersection of the issues and policies between Canada and the United States. Here are your hosts, Beth Burke and Chris Sands.
I'm Beth Burke with the Canadian American Business Council, joined today by the one and only Chris Sands.
Hi, Beth.
How's it going today?
It's always a sunny day on Canusa Street.
I bet it is.
And it's really exciting to be here with you, my new co-host.
Well, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. I know the incomparable and wonderful Scotty Greenwood is sorry to be missing us today, but I'm very excited to be jumping in and joining Canusa Street.
Well, I think you'll do very, very well. Scotty gave us the vision. We are just walking the street together now and the path that she blazed.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'm also really excited to announce our guest today. We have Minister Mary Ng, and I will let Chris do the formal introduction, but I just want to say, as you know, my first podcast guest, I am beyond honored and thrilled to have you join us today. So thank you so much for taking the time. And Chris, do you want to do a formal introduction for us?
Oh, absolutely. We are so glad to have Mary Ng, the Honourable Mary Ng, who's Minister of Export Promotion, International Trade and Economic Development, and also the Member of Parliament for Markham Thornhill. Her constituency. I know we're not supposed to say riding anymore, but I can never tell whether you use the one or the other. But she was elected in 2017. She previously served as Minister of International Trade, Export Promotion, Small Business and Economic Development. That's a very long title. And then Minister of Small Business, Export Promotion and International Trade. Before all of that, she's a devoted community leader who always believed in the power of public service. She's got 20 years of experience in areas of education, women's leadership, job creation, entrepreneurship. So when you look for what ties all the many things that the Prime Minister has asked her to do, it's really drawing on that lived experience and bringing it forward into good public policy. She also worked in Ontario Public Service, Ryerson University, and the Ontario Ministry of Education, all leading her to be recognized by the Prime Minister as one of the top performing public sector leaders and a great recruit for Parliament and for the Government of Canada. Mary Ng, welcome.
Well, Chris, it's terrific to be with you. And as I said, with the smart folks at the Wilson Centre, to which we always count on, for the good work that comes out of the Wilson Centre. And Beth, it's great to be here with you. Welcome to your job. I'm excited. I'm going to be looking forward to working with you in this new role. The work that you do, that you will do, and Scotty before you is just so important because I see it as such an important and integral bridge for Canada and the U.S. So I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Well, thank you so much. That's so kind. I really appreciate it.
Minister, since you're here, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about something that we're all thinking about with Scotty moving to Manulife and becoming only a visitor with us in Canusa Street. Can you talk a little bit about women in the private sector? And, Scotty's, of course, an amazing example, but how women are faring in business in Canada and why they're so important for your inclusive trade agenda, which I know we've talked about before.
Yeah, well, I'm so thrilled that Scotty is taking on this new role with a great Canadian company and a Canadian company that operates around the world, including a very deep presence in the Indo-Pacific, where Canada is charting, ambitious new ground in growth diversification, trade diversification there. But having a women leader, especially one like Scotty, is really important because, for one thing, we are sort of 50% of the population, right? And in all of the work that I have done as a trade minister and certainly as the small business minister prior, it's really creating the conditions in Canada so that women entrepreneurs, exporters, women in technology, women's leadership can really take on that role of contributing to our communities and contributing through the economy. So when you have a women leader, take the helm of the role that Scotty is taking on, and the role, quite candidly, that Beth, you are occupying, or the one that I occupy. I mean, I serve the Canadian cabinet with half my colleagues as women, and the other half as men. But if I were to sum it up, why is it so important? It's important because it is about greater economic participation by women in our respective economies. And while I have the important file of being an economic minister, so in trade and in business or in economic development, I don't do this work certainly around inclusive growth or enabling women to be successful in the economy on my own. I rely on my colleagues who have done things and who, as a government have implemented important, what I would call economic social policies that really advance women participating even greater, competing even better in our economy. So what am I talking about? Early learning and $10 a day childcare in Canada. So when you are enabling a woman to provide affordable childcare for her family, her kids, she's participating fully. And we are seeing that in the numbers, reflected in the numbers. I mean, we have over 85% of participation by Canadian women in the workforce. That's absolutely terrific. Wow. I meet women around, women entrepreneurs in particular, and leaders around the world who, when I talk to them about what Canada has done around parental leave, so we have parental leave here that's an 18-month parental leave where you as a mom can choose to return to leading your company or leading your business or to your work, and your partner decides to take some portion, a significant portion of that parental leave. So dad is at home, for example. So, these are policies that are made very deliberately by our government, but it's made deliberately so that they become partner economic policies for me as an economic minister to drive growth, to drive competitiveness, and to drive greater participation by women leaders in our economy and in our society.
I noticed in the last election, your party was very committed to female candidates, and I think you had 147 out of your candidates there. You brought in almost 60 into Parliament, which is impressive. Other parties are making efforts as well. Can you talk a little bit about the challenge of being a member of Parliament, a politician of all things, and also being a woman, obviously representing a lot of different things, but juggling, multitasking, so many things in life. How is it to be a member of Parliament and also a woman juggling all these responsibilities that you have?
Well, maybe I'll answer that question with a bit of a story, and it's a story that I can share door knocking in my own riding, in my own constituency. And in fact, this was when I was a candidate, and it was my very first election. And as a woman, it is true. This, at least for me, the statistics are true, which is that you feel apprehensive about doing the job because you don't know if you really are cut out to do the job. And you question yourself about, can I really step up and do this? I believe strongly in women's representation, but when it comes to you actually do question. And that was certainly my own experience. So it is true, the statistics where you have to ask women a number of times before they take on that leadership role, whether it being a politician or any leadership role, I would say, but certainly as a politician. And the story was that I was knocking on the door of a house in my riding in Markham Thornhill, and a gentleman came to the door. And my by-election, of course, was in the depth of winter. So it was a snowstorm outside on that day when I was knocking on the door. And I said, absolutely, because, you're presenting your best face forward to your constituent, your future constituent, you hope. Yeah. And he says, just hold on a second. And then he went into the house, came back to the door. He brought his daughters to the door. He brought his daughter, and he said, "I want you to say hi to my daughter." Her experience is very similar to ours as immigrants. I mean, I have a constituency that is very diverse. So many of the people I represent are, were born elsewhere outside the country, but they are wonderful Canadians that contribute so much to the fabric of Canadian society. But he brought her to the door because he said, look at her. She's here because she wants to get elected to represent us in this seat. And the reason he brought his daughter to see me was because because there's that saying, which is you have to see her to be her. He wanted his daughter to see that there is someone who is taking on public life, wishing to take on public life at the time, because this is now in 2017, and to be that example, So I carry that with me all the time, because I think what comes with it of being an example is also responsibility. It's a responsibility to pay it forward. It's a responsibility to open other doors for other people, for other women, for others who are in racialized communities like myself, or who are immigrants. It's also to do a good job. It's to represent your constituents well. It's to do this job that I've been appointed to by the Prime Minister as the Trade Minister and the Economic Development Minister for Canada, and to do it the very best that I can. That's the sense of responsibility I carry, and I think that as women, you carry. I carry that responsibility, but then you have other responsibilities. For many, many years, I was a caregiver for my elderly parents, and you have that responsibility.
Sure.
I know that many of my colleagues and friends are also moms. So you multitask, and you're wearing these many hats, and at the same time, you want to do the job that you are given to do, and you want to do it exceedingly well, because my country counts on me to do my job well. The businesses that I represent count on me to do this job very well. The entrepreneurs, the investors, they all count on me to do my job really, really well. So I don't know if that really sort of answers the question, but it's a bit of a story of my own experience. But it's an honor to get to do this. And as I said earlier in the last question, as a minister that has a responsibility for the economic file, one of the economic files for my country, I certainly rely on the Prime Minister, on the commitment of my government to also implement smart policies that are economic, social policies that lifts people out of poverty, that creates better conditions for women and for families in Canada. And that is at the very heart of why inclusive growth is so important. It's to create those conditions. And maybe one point on that, as and I'll bring it to kind of the job, which is, I'm the trade minister, so therefore NAFTA, as we knew it to be, but today, depending on which country, it's the USMCA, CUSMA, or TMEC. When we renegotiated that, we put in really strong provisions, right? Like for inclusive trade. So there's an SME chapter in there. And when I do the annual meetings with with my other two amigas, right? I mean, in the US and in Mexico, in of course, Ambassador Tai and Secretary Bonrostro in Mexico, we actually do get a report on the work that the SME committee has been doing and what they have been doing together to create, to share tools, to create greater opportunities for women entrepreneurs, for small and medium-sized businesses to trade and to work and to be more competitive in our economies. Because for the small ones, it actually is harder to do. And therefore, it's incumbent on us as governments to have the apparatus and the structure. And I'm so thrilled that as, Canada and the United States, we're committed to doing this. We're committed to doing this through this agreement, and we've architectured it into the agreement. And I think that's really important.
I'm so glad you raised small businesses. It's another thing that is very near and dear to my heart as well. And, I know you've talked about it now sort of through the USMCA CUSMA lens, but would also love for you to talk a little bit about what Canada's doing to help grow small businesses and, incentivize innovation within small businesses.
A lot. I mean, up until July, I was also Canada's small business, and now that wonderful portfolio is being headed up by another really terrific colleague of mine, the very first Filipino Canadian appointed as a Minister of the Crown, in Minister Richie Valdez, and she is doing that job so remarkably, which is to support Canadian domestic small businesses in their growth. I used to have this tagline, which said, "Look, my job is to help Canadian businesses start up, scale up, and access new markets." Right. So the startup and scale up part is very much about nurturing their growth, supporting their growth, their start and their growth in Canada, and then access to new markets. Of course, is the work that I do as the trade minister to help them grow into markets like the United States, which are so important to Canadian small businesses. But maybe I'll spend the time on a couple of really important policies and work that the Canadian government has done, and that I had the wonderful sort of opportunity to start and to lead. One is the Women's Entrepreneurship Strategy. The second is the Black Entrepreneurship Strategy. Why do you need strategies like that, you ask? Well, we know that for small businesses, and particularly for those that have been often underrepresented in our economies, they have a challenge finding access to capital, right? Lending support, whether to start, whether to grow, so growth capital. They often also don't have the business network supports or the mentorship supports. And we don't capture data in a way that would help us benefit from best practices and then be able to then make good policy decisions, investment decisions based on what we learn from capturing this data. So both of those strategies have three components to it. One, it's an access to capital component. Number two, it is an ecosystem component. And number three, a knowledge hub. So access to capital are things like, the government of Canada providing sort of a first dollar in, if you will, that then helps to, work with banking institutions, venture capital organizations, and others to actually help with that very difficult challenge of small businesses getting access to capital. And in fact, we have data that shows if you're a woman-owned business or you're a Black-owned business, it's even harder for you, right? So that's the first part. The second is ecosystems of support. So what is that? So we have regional sort of these regional ecosystems across the country, because it is about the networks. It is about the business network. It is about business training. It's about mentorship. It's about sponsorship, right? I mean, so, when you have teams of successful business leaders in communities across the country who are willing to provide that mentorship, that leadership, that sponsorship to growing businesses, you're learning then from those who've done it before you. So we've got these great ecosystems across the country. And then finally, the Knowledge Hub actually measures. And I'll give you a perfect example of where, as a minister, I took the advice of one of the recommendations that came from the Knowledge Hub. They said, look, you're doing a pretty good job in terms of, opening up and creating the right conditions for there to be more lending to small businesses. But you know what you're missing? You're missing the loans that go from 0 to 50,000. So imagine that. 0 to 50,000. So those are small loans, right? And so what did we do? We then, we have the first ever finance minister who happens to also be a woman, who is our terrific deputy prime minister Minister Freeland. And he said, look, in budget, I think 2 budgets ago, we decided to put an investment in that allowed the government of Canada, working with partners really to actually do small, that small amount lending, right, for women entrepreneurs in particular. So that's where that virtuous circle is. So I have countless other examples of how we are helping businesses grow, innovative businesses, right? Like digital businesses that need, where we're helping with making sure they have the supports to get IP support. Like CanExport is a really great program out of Canada that actually helps Canadian businesses who are looking to export. The Trade Accelerator program is a program that we put up in Canada that is helping small businesses in particular come up with an export plan. How do you actually, you may not be thinking about your business and your business growth in terms of export. How do you even begin? So we have the Trade Accelerator program that help Canadian businesses and those entrepreneurs look at their business and develop a plan that helps them to, determine where would I grow? What parts of my business would grow? Where would I export? And what is, and how do I actually, kind of begin doing that, right? So there are countless, we do a lot of work. And I would say that Canada does a lot of work, but we actually also do this work together. And I think some of this work actually gets done together through the sharing some of these really good practices through the SME committee in particular.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Minister, I remember a couple of years ago, I took a group of students. We went to visit the wonderful Canadian province of Alberta, and we had a chance to talk to then Premier Jason Kenney, and then met with former Premier Rachel Notley. And one of my students, one of the women on the group, asked Rachel Notley, do you feel that you get extra sort of negativity or aggression on the campaign trail because you're a woman? And her response surprised us all. She said, no, you look at what Jason gets. There is a point at which we've crossed the line in civil discourse and politics where people just really vent at you, and it can be quite scary. Do you find that to be true? Maybe it's an Alberta thing, maybe it's a Canada-wide thing, and does it scare people from getting involved in politics in our polarized time? I know we have polarized politics in the U.S. as well, so this is really just a sense of whether that's something that bothers Canadians, and is it getting better or worse in your experience?
I think it's more important than ever in times of uncertainty, where, for more people to get involved. I think that you're a sum of your parts, and your parts are your team. And they're people who are looking to give of themselves by offering their service to take on public life. And I think that the way to combat issues, right? And the negativity is by continuing to do everything we can to encourage good people to continue to participate. Because if you don't, then what have you got, right? And so irrespective of the environment that is around, and I think that people, I think it is a worrisome time right now, because look at what is, look at geopolitically what is happening in the world. And we are seeing record inflation take place around the world. Canada is no different. It's cold comfort to people when I rhyme up a statistic that says, well, we have the lowest inflation among our G7 colleagues. That doesn't matter at all to Canadians, because at the end of the day, if it costs you more money to do things like pay for food, or fill up the tank because you have to take your kids to school, or that it costs more for you to rent or to pay your mortgage, then it hits home, right? And with that comes, an expected level of concern for people and for their families. So I think that the way I look at it is that we have to all be in it together. The vibrant nature of countries like Canada and the United States are vibrant democracies that are underpinned by a rule of law, and people who respect one another, because we are a country, we're a country made up of differences. We're a country made up of people who are multilingual, multi-faith, multicultural, but we are proud Canadians, and Canadian values matter, and we look out after one another. We always seek to look out after one another. So I think, I think of, some scary times at the beginning of the pandemic, when words do matter, right? I'm Asian, and we saw an incredible rise in anti-Asian sentiments and racism. And I had to stand up. I had to stand up for anybody who looked like me to say that it cannot be tolerated. And you know what was the most terrific thing about it? Canadians stood up with me. Canadians stood up with me as allies, because the value that is important to Canada in a democracy and in a country that embraces diversity and where we as Canadians believe that the strength of our diversity is what makes us strong as a country. For all those reasons, it is more important. I would say it's even more important to make sure that we continue to do the work to attract people, good people from all walks of society, to participate in public life. The reason the House of Commons is called the House of Commons is the House of Commons, right? Parliamentarians, we all 338 of us who have a seat, are there because the people in our respective constituencies and ridings have elected us as their voice to represent them in the House of Commons. So having more women, having more people who are the face of Canada, having people believe that in service of their country in politics is noble, irrespective of whatever political party you come from, is something we should continue to work very, very hard at, and to fight against, to fight against and to work together against any negativity, because I think that our people expect that of us. I know my constituents expect that of me. So, so in fact, when I think about tough days, it's precisely those tough days sometimes that I say to myself, this is the reason I'm in it. Of course, this is the reason I'm in it.
Absolutely. Now, Minister Eng, thank you. We're going to take a short break. Have to take care of the sponsors. And when we come back, I want to give Beth a chance to get in another one of her questions.
What did Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie King and President Woodrow Wilson have in common? Yes, they both led their countries during wartime, but they were also the only leaders of their countries to hold a PhD. At the Wilson Center's Canada Institute, we follow these academic civil servants to bring the public the best nonpartisan research and analysis. We're the only think tank in DC focused on this vital relationship. So in addition to the great repartee you get to hear on Canusa Street, head over to wilsoncenter.org to check out the Canada Institute's work and events.
Welcome back to Canusa Street, where I'm joined today by my co-host Chris Sands and our wonderful guest, Minister Mary Eng. Thank you so much for being with us. You had talked about some of your travels, and one of the questions I have is, you travel a lot. How do you decide where you go and sort of when you go on these trips?
Well, some of it is decided for me, and I'll give you an example. Canada is a part of many multilateral tables, right? So the G7, we're a member of the G7 with the United States. We're a member of the G20. We're a member of APEC. We're a member of a whole number of multilateral meetings, the WTO. And Canada has some really important trade agreements with important partners like Canada, US, and Mexico. So in July, on the anniversary of the agreement, we meet, the three of us together, and we switch kind of, from Canada, US, and Mexico and so forth. But I also do that with the European Union. I also do that with the CPTPP partners. So already there, I've sort of listed, I don't know, probably half a dozen of Canada's participation in multilateral bodies that are really important to Canada's relationship with our trading partners, but with, to our allies and our partners around the world, and certainly on trade. So those dates sort of are decided for me, right? I mean, yes, we do have a say. I mean, but by and large, like, I will be leaving in a couple of weeks, and I will be in Japan, because Japan is hosting the G7 this year. So I will be seeing Ambassador Tai in Japan. But those, so those are the dates for the multilaterals. And then we have a very ambitious agenda around how I take Canadian companies on Team Canada trade missions to parts of the world, to help open up market access for them, to help facilitate opportunities for both investment and for trade. So we've already announced, alongside the G7, I will be going to Japan with a Team Canada trade mission. I will be, next year, it's actually quite a busy year for the Team Canada trade missions, particularly around Canada's Indo-Pacific strategy. So I'll be in the Philippines, I'll be in Vietnam, I'll be in Malaysia, I'll be in South Korea, I'll be in Indonesia. And that's the Indo-Pacific trade Team Canada trade mission program for 2024, which we just announced. So that gets plugged into the calendar. And then, and then important for us, like, the OECD, for example, or for us that are, that our colleagues host, where we think it's really important for Canada to be there. I mean, Canada is also a signatory to initiatives like, the acronym is GTAGA, but it is the Global Trade and Gender Arrangement, or IPECTA, which is the Indigenous Peoples Economic Trade Cooperation cooperation among a number of countries. So a lot of a lot of the work is part of the work, and therefore part of the schedule that you fit in month to month, week to week, throughout the year. So and it's very fitting for Canada because we're a trading country. 1 out of 6 jobs in Canada is related to trade. 2/3 of our economy is related to trade. The businesses that trade are the vast employers for employees and workers in Canada. So it's really important that the trade minister does this work with our partners and in support of the Canadian companies and exporters who are looking for me to do my work, so that they can continue to grow or diversify or break into some of these markets.
Absolutely. And knowing the special trade relationship between US and Canada, how often are you in DC or in the United States?
Quite often, and probably more often if I could fit it into the schedule. Because Canada and US actually spend, because we actually are at many of the multilateral forums together, there's no shortage of ability for me to actually engage with my counterpart, which is really terrific. So the US-Canada relationship and dialogue and the opportunity to work together is actually quite robust because we belong to a number of similar organizations that find ourselves to have the opportunity to be together. And then I get down to DC, and then I've had the opportunity to welcome Ambassador Tai here, but it isn't just in my portfolio; it's the portfolios across the government as well. It's important for me to also engage with members of Congress in the U.S. As a legislator myself. It's really important to always sort of do that work. But and today, I suppose post-COVID, some of it is made a little easier as well because we have a new tool, right? We have a new tool which is a virtual tool. So sometimes, even if you're not able to physically get there, you can actually get on a Zoom or on a video call pretty easily. So, and we've got a great team in, Ambassador Hillman is there as Canada's ambassador to the United States, and she's a great team supporting the work of Canada in the United States, and a great network of Canadian offices across America.
Absolutely. So switching gears just a little bit, as I'm new to the podcast game here, I was wondering if, besides obviously Canusa Street, if there are any other podcasts that you listen to or that you enjoy that sort of help shape the way you think about either current events or trade specifically, or if there's anything you would recommend for our listeners or me to take a listen to?
Well, I mean, out of fear of, favoring one over the other, I mean, Canusa, of course, is what people should be listening to. Let's just...
Well, exactly, right?
Of course.
But I mean, I sort of, I listen to sort of a smattering of almost everything, right? I mean, and so there isn't one or another. I mean, that really is the case. I mean, and these days, it really is sort of multi-channel as well, because there are still some really, I still believe in the written word, and some really great writings that are done by great think tanks like the Wilson Center, or by great authors who actually are thought leaders who are writing a perspective about about trade, or about politics, or the economy. So I really try to do sort of a smattering of, and because I spend enough time on planes, it's a great opportunity there as well to do them in almost I do them in clusters, I suppose.
So binging, basically.
Binging, yes, that's it. I was looking for that word. Yes, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Perfect. Well, Chris, I don't mean to dominate. If you have any other questions, please feel free.
I think the podcast is in good hands when you're you, Scotty, the minister, are talking, not so much me. But I appreciate the tips, because I'm always trying to read a little bit more myself, and so thank you for the suggestions, Minister. as we look forward to what's going to be a fascinating year in American politics, Mexican politics, two big elections for sure, and a Canadian election, at least by statutory requirement, will be in 2025. Where do you think we find ourselves in North America? Are we going to get to 2026 and be renegotiating the USMCA? I know a lot of these things are uncertain, but do you feel in the first 3 years that we've had with this agreement, which I still think you have a huge role in because of your role in making sure that it's implemented fairly and properly, and there are still some questions, U.S. interpretation of automotive content and other things notwithstanding. But do you think that we're in good shape? And what would you like to see as sort of a sign that we're going to stick with this course that we're on?
Yeah, well, I think overall we're in good shape because as rules-based countries and having an agreement and this is an excellent agreement, right? I mean, many chapters have been updated. Those that really sort of exemplify the values that are important to Canadians, Americans, are really sort of in here, right? Like, I mean, think about no forced labor in our supply chains. Think about the labor provisions that are very strong. Think about the enforceability around the environment, right? Environmental, protections, right? Think about, we talked about that a little earlier, a chapter that's dedicated to facilitating the growth for those that are small and medium-sized businesses in our economies, right? So I think all of that is really, really good. And we just saw a decision of a panel report come out just a few days ago with respect to softwood lumber, which meant that it was a dispute panel that was put forward through the NAFTA panel. In fact, it was it was an NAFTA panel, but we preserved that, which was Chapter 19 in Chapter 10. That was so important for Canada because when you trade and in a relationship as large as ours, and here's a fun fact, because I always look at this, 90% of Canadians live within 150 miles of the U.S. border, right? Like, so it's a close relationship. And $140 million of trade crosses our border each hour. $140 million, because we trade over $1 trillion between our two countries, right? We're so integrated. If you take a look at a car, it has to cross like 6 times before it's even assembled, right? So this relationship is one that is that's longstanding, and with a relationship, like I said, as large as it is in volume and as integrated as it is, you need tools. You need tools and mechanisms like a dispute settlement mechanism. So that's in this agreement, right? I mean, in the renegotiation. And this review, and the obligation to have a review in 2026 is what we all agreed to do. But I always remind people that you're not renegotiating NAFTA 2026, right? It's 2036. 2036 is when the agreement remains in effect. So 2026 is the first time that we will review it together as trading partners. And I think reviews are always good. Why? Because it's a mechanism for you to look at what you could do better, right? I mean, or to do a check-in. So I think it's healthy. And look, we all agreed to it. So we're going to work towards how to do this. But we get to do this review sort of each year. And the agreement really is about, if it's working, then we as trading partners can decide to extend beyond 2036. So when I meet with businesses all the time, probably the single most important thing that they raise with me is for governments to provide them with predictability and stability. Predictability and stability is about the rules. They know what the rules are, they understand the timings in the rules, and they expect governments to work within that. And as a rules-based country, that's essentially what we do, right? We have an agreement that guides us. We have mechanisms in the agreement to allow us to resolve issues, and we keep working together. We meet every year because we work together. We have those committees in the many committees that make up this agreement, report into the 3 trade leaders of each of our countries, of the 3 of us. So I think that having a trade agreement that has served us well. It has helped our economies grow, and it has helped us lift people right? I mean, lift the standard of living for people. And if you look at what the United States is doing around its commitment to fight climate change through whether it's the IRA or the CHIPS Act, I mean, and we are doing that in Canada as well. This is about us very deliberately working in a way that is going to build the economy of the future that necessarily has to be green. So, and I fully believe that our agreement is an enabler to help us do that.
Yeah, I've heard from some of our European allies the frustration about U.S. industrial policy, that things just sort of keep coming at them and all the money that the U.S. throws out. But I always point to Canada because you guys don't wait. When you start hearing Congress talking about things, the Canadians are here expressing their, concerns, making sure that people know. And as a result, everything doesn't work out perfectly, but you're proactive and you've headed off a lot of bad ideas before they came down on your head because of that engaged diplomacy. And also, I have to say, Minister, the positivity you bring to it. It's not a negative slog. It's a how do we work together? And that attitude, which you exemplify, but I think a lot of our Canadian interlocutors do in this relationship, is a real, boon. It's a real positive thing that seems recursive somehow.
Yeah, well, I was reflecting actually as I was getting ready to sort of to do this podcast, and I was sort of I was thinking back to remember the Build Back Better Act, right? Mm-hmm. And just to your point there, it was really concerning for Canada. I mean, we and the United States make cars together. We've been making cars for over 100 years. We've been doing it very deliberately through the Auto Pact and then through subsequent trade agreements like NAFTA and CUSMA and USMCA. And when we saw that there could have been discriminatory elements of it that actually cut out Canada, we absolutely had to work with our American friends and our trading partner. We had to do that. Free and fair trade does work, but and today we are going to be building electric vehicles together. And the more electric vehicles that we have, batteries that get built, we have all the critical minerals that are necessary that go into these minerals, that go into these batteries. Canada and the United States are working together on that to make sure that the supply chain for critical minerals is one that the United States can depend. They can depend on Canada. You can depend on us for having a green supply chain for those critical minerals that are absolutely required to go into batteries, and those batteries that are absolutely going to go into the electric vehicles that we're going to be making together. That's where we are today, but it took us work to make sure that we can find the common ground that said, look, this is good for, we understand what the Americans are aiming to do for fighting climate change and for making sure that their workers, that there was fairness for their workers, but we could do it together with Canada, and that's always our message, right? I mean, that we do have to work at it together. This is a relationship, and I believe it's an enduring one because it is one where we can talk through issues even when they are tough. In fact, when it is tough, it requires us to do that together more and more. And we also count on that 90% of Canadians who live, within 150 miles of the U.S. border because, they know their U.S. their U.S. neighbors pretty well too. And vice versa, I might say.
And vice versa. Something coming back after COVID now, we can cross the border and rekindle those partnerships. Beth, this is your rookie episode. I should let you have the last question, last word.
Well, I feel like we've covered so much great, important ground. Maybe I'll end things on a very light note. What's your favorite part of your role?
Oh my gosh, I have so many, so many. But I would say what energizes me the most, and it's it's the people. It really is. So whether it is in my constituency where I see the work of the government translate into something that actually really helps people, right? Whether it's Canada Child Benefit that's helping families, whether it's early learning and childcare, dental care for families who would normally not be able to afford to take their kids to the dentist, right? So that's really wonderful. And then on the ministerial portfolio, like meeting a business that says to me that the tools that they were able to take advantage of from their government actually help their business expand or look at an opportunity that they may not have looked at, that's hugely rewarding. Like the reason I believe that all of us do this is that you hope that your work will actually make a real difference in the lives of people. And to have a portfolio like mine in trade, and it's easy to sort of think about these big agreements and everything, or some of the work that you do, at these multilateral tables. But really, at the heart of it, has to work for people. It has to work for the people you serve. So to me, that's the most rewarding thing, right? And getting validation for that from a business owner, that's what's the most rewarding.
Well, absolutely. Well, that has been the most rewarding part of my day, is interacting with these two wonderful people. Thank you so much for taking the time and having this conversation and welcoming me with such open arms. I feel so fortunate to have had the chance to chat with you. So thank you so much. And
you're welcome back on Canusa Street anytime.
Well, thank you so much. And it's great to be at Canusa Street. And Beth, I know it's going to be terrific for you. And I'm looking forward to our working together. And Chris, I look forward to seeing you next very soon, either there in DC or up here in Canada, one or the other.
Yep, I'm on my way. Thank you very much, Minister Mary Eng.
Thanks.
This podcast is brought to you by the Canadian American Business Council and the Wilson Center. If you like this episode, help others find our show and give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.